Welcome to Solo Solutions, short, bite-sized episodes of the podcast which will help you create strategies to improve your physique, your mindset, your performance, your health, and your business. We all know that action leads to momentum, and momentum leads to big goals. These episodes are designed to give you one key tip or one key strategy to help you push through your sticking blocks and get into the best condition, mindset, or business possible. I understand that nutrition can be a really complicated place. With so many diets out there, it's sometimes a complete minefield about knowing which diet is the right one for you. Should I be going keto? Should I be going high carb, carnivore? Should I try Weight Watchers points? Do I need to track calories? Is it about hormones? It's enough to make your head explode. In this episode of Solo Solutions, what I want to do is I want to break down what is important. We are coming up to the time where a lot of people are starting to want to get in shape with summer and they don't know where to start with nutrition. So I want to go through some things to make you realize what is the most important stuff here, some approaches that you can use to find the right dietary approach for you, and break it all down so you truly understand where your next steps are. So when we look at trying to improve our body composition, what we need to understand is that calories generally are king. People talk about whether it's hormones or calories or is it the right foods. All these things are important, but if we want to lose weight, we need to be in a caloric deficit. If we want to gain weight, we need to be in a caloric surplus. So when we're looking at this is the first thing we need to consider when coming to this. Now, why is it that some people think that hormones are more important than calories? And the answer is that calories aren't exclusive of this. Hormones do play a role, but they play a role that change the calorie equation. We think when we talk about calories in versus calories out, we think calories in is the amount of food that we put into our mouth, and calories out is solely the amount we get up and move. And while that is a huge part of it, there are other things that come into account. When we look at hormones, I imagine hormones like a good American football game. If the manager's working well and he talks to the coach and the coaches talk to the quarterback and the quarterback is really in tune with these wide receivers and he can throw the ball and he run every pass, that they're going to outbeat really good opposition. But if those things aren't communicating well, if some missed balls are thrown, if there's sacks coming, for those who know American football, it's going to be much harder to win even against lesser opposition. So when we're looking at calories in versus hormones, if they're in your right space and your health's in a good place, they will affect the calories out part of the equation to make that more efficient. So to help you understand this, I'm going to break down what actually constitutes our day-to-day calories. So when we're looking at our overall calorie intake, somewhere between 60 to 70% of it is something called our BMR. This is basal metabolic rate. And this is the amount of calories we need to just, if we lie down in bed all day, didn't move, this is the stuff to allow us to stay alive, keep our internal organs running, keep our brain running, all that good stuff that we need. So while in theory we can't really do much about this, there are a few things that can actually sort of pull this down. If we spend too long in a dieting phase, things like testosterone, thyroid are going to start to decline, which will decrease our BMR. If we spend a long time and lose a lot of weight and we get lighter, that will start to decrease our BMR. So we'll talk about refeeding strategies, how long to be in a diet, how to reverse diets, another episode of Solo Solutions. But understand that 60 to 70% of it is just the calories you need to maintain your internal health. So now we've got that, what are the things that we actually do have an impact on? Now, there's 15 to 20% here that's going to be NEAT. What we call NEAT is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And this is what people consider as steps. But in reality, this isn't really steps. This is our subconscious movement. This is our fidgeting. This is our tapping our feet. This is just moving around. These are the movements we don't think about on a day-to-day basis and the calories they burn. Now, why has this been linked to steps? Well, if you were my client, I'm not going to say to you, your goal for this week is to fidget more. It's unrealistic. How can you track how much you fidget? And when we go through a diet, our NEAT gradually declines. Our body will always try and maintain something called homeostasis, which is just essentially a sciencey word for balance. If we're eating less food, our body will try and auto-regulate itself so we're staying in balance and we're not starving ourselves. So our body will naturally lean on things. We'll start to take escalators rather than stairs. We won't fidget as much. We won't tap our foot as much. We'll tend to find things like when I'm at the end of a diet, my brain goes to pot. I remember in a diet 3-4 years ago where I almost ruined my works coffee machine by putting water where the beans should go and coffee where the water should go. I've lost my keys in the fridge, I've lost iPads in this time, I've lost passports in this time, and that's just the body trying to conserve energy, and that's our downregulation of NEAT. Now, while it doesn't include steps, why we use steps as this is if that downregulation occurs and we can't do much about it, if we increase our step count, this just offsets that natural downregulation that will occur. So as we go through the diet, as that drops, we can increase our steps to sort of make sure that we're still having the same amount of calories out, roughly. So now we've got BMR, we've got NEAT. The next thing we're going to look at is what we call the thermic effect of food. So this is the amount of calories we will burn by digesting the food that we take in on a day-to-day basis. Now, there's a couple of things we need to think about here. The first thing is that this is one of the many reasons why a higher protein intake is really beneficial when dieting. Protein has a higher thermic effect, which means it burns more calories whilst we're digesting it. This is why we find that one of many reasons why people have higher protein intakes have been shown to get better fat loss results on average. But another thing we need to think of with thermic effect of food is that if we're going on a diet, we're probably going to eat less food. When we eat less food, there's less calories needed for digestion, thermic effect will naturally go down. This is often one of the reasons why sometimes having a refeed can upregulate things. It's not that a one-day refeed has upregulated thyroid and testosterone. We need a much longer period of time at maintenance calories or in a surplus for that. But a one-day high day or refeed or cheat day, if you want to call it that, can be used to upregulate the thermic effect of food and burn through calories through that because we've eaten a little bit more. It can restock glycogen levels, so we train a little bit harder, and it can upregulate our NEAT, so we move a little bit more because the body knows we're not starving. It doesn't need to slow you down anymore. So that again is roughly around 10 to 15% of our total calories. The last thing in this piece of the puzzle is something called exercise activity thermogenesis, or EAT. This is the amount of calories we burn solely through training. This thing we burn in weight training, cardio, etc., etc. And that's probably around about 10%. And that's a really important thing to remember because a lot of us think we can out-train a bad diet. And while that, in theory, is possible, you'd have to be running multiple marathons a day to get anywhere, the level of caloric expenditure needed. It's so much harder to burn off an amount of calories than it is to not eat the amount of calories. So when people choose training modalities based on the amount of calories they burn, it's really a misguided approach. You're not really going to make a big impact with that. You're much better suited trying to use your training as a way of holding on to, if not building some muscle tissue, and improving your aerobic health. So now we know what our calories are consisting of. How do we go about setting them? Now understand there are a million calorie calculators out there, and none of them are necessarily wrong. So everything that we do is going to be an educated guess. And the important thing that you need to know is set something. Don't second guess it. Don't look for the calculators. Set something, track, adjust it, and find if it's working, and then fine tune it over time till you find that sweet spot where you're losing anywhere between 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week. So if you're 80 kilos, that'd be 0.8 per week. If you're 100 kilos, that'd be a kilo a week. So first off, whatever you use, doesn't really matter. Just get started doing something. But that being said, if most people are going to be listening to this, want somewhere to start. So if you're a complete beginner, new to the gym, don't know how to train, how get the level of training intensity that may be needed to make the most of these calories. If your steps are well under 10,000 steps per day, you're not moving very much, starting off at around 10 calories per pound of body weight is not a bad place to start. It just allows a bit of a margin for error for any tracking errors. It allows you to get a bit of a quick win, and it allows you to maybe scale up in calories as you move more, as you start to learn how to train harder, as you become more accurate with your tracking. And I think it's a good place for most of you to start. If you're listening to this and you're a coach or an intermediate trainee, something like that, 12 calories per pound is not a bad place to start here because you're going to be utilizing those extra 2 calories per pound by training a little bit harder, moving a little bit more. And a rough guide, if you want an idea where maintenance calories are, I would go anywhere between 16 to 18 calories per pound. Understand, these are all rough guesses, and anything you do will need adjustments. Every one of us is a little bit different. If you are an advanced person looking at this and has been tracking their food for a while and knows how many calories they're on, I wouldn't use a calculator. I'd find out what your baseline is and then maybe to take a small reduction from that. But if you're new, don't know where to start, 10 calories per pound if you're a complete beginner, 12 calories per pound if you're an intermediate is a good place to go from. So we've now got our calorie target. We're now going to move on to our macronutrients. So macronutrients are what makes up our calories. We're looking at proteins, carbs, and fats, and alcohol is also a macronutrient, but we're going to talk about mainly proteins, fats, and carbs because that's the important one. So the one that's really important is protein intake. So, fats and carbs for most people, if you're not training for really high level sport, can sort of go up and down depending on preference. And some people prefer that, some people prefer things to be a bit stricter, but protein really has been shown to have a big impact. As we mentioned earlier, it has a higher thermic effect, so you burn more calories digesting protein. But it's also the building blocks of lean tissue. So if you want to hold on to muscle mass when we're dieting, which most of us want to look athletic at the end of this process, then that's going to be a good thing to have a higher protein intake. But it also has a higher satiation, which means we're going to be fuller. We're not going to get as hungry, which one of the things that messes up so many diets is how hungry people get from a low level of food volume and a low protein intake. So getting that protein in there is really, really important. So protein is about 4 calories per gram. So if you have, let's say, 20 grams of protein, that would be 80 calories. So just bear that in mind. And also, sounds obvious, but always look at the amount of protein within a food source, not the weight of the food source. If you have 100 grams of chicken, that's roughly around 20 grams of protein. That's not 100 grams of protein. So track, start to build aware of this food, start learning what is in the food you're intaking. The initial baseline, I would say, for protein intake is around about 1.8 to 2.5 grams per kilo of body weight. If you want a slightly higher carbohydrate diet, you could be on the lower end. Girls are going to be on the lower end of this. If you're a plant-based eater, I would go on the lower end of this, otherwise it'd be quite difficult for you. But there's no real harm in going on the higher end of this. Going on the higher end of this, while maybe not necessary, more protein isn't necessarily better, but what it will do is it will keep you full on the diet for longer. And if it's easier to stick at around 2.5 plus grams of protein per pound per kilo of body weight, then, and it makes your diet easier, then, and you can digest it, be my guest. The next thing we're going to look at is fats. This is the other essential macronutrient, and it's needed for hormones and vitamin and mineral absorption. So it's a really, really important thing. You don't really want to go too low. I would recommend for most people, for long periods of time, do not go below 30 grams of fats, especially females. But for periods of time, if you're healthy and you've got a deadline and you want to push, you can do. But that's probably the bottom end of where I would go. The big thing to be aware of with fats, it is 9 calories per gram. So just be aware of what your fat intake is. I see a lot of people thinking that nuts are clean and they end up hemorrhaging calories with nuts. They end up having so much because they're just unaware thinking this food is clean. Oils, milks and lattes, these things add up quickly. So just be aware of that. So next thing we're going to look at is carbohydrates. While carbohydrates is not an essential fuel source, you can go without carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, it's been popular to hate on carbohydrates. They cause fat gain and insulin is the devil. And that really isn't true. Insulin is a storage hormone, yes, and it does store things into fat cells if there's excess there. But it also is protein sparing, allows us to keep muscle mass. It also allows us to recover and repair tissue. It allows us to do fuel for training. It can calm the central nervous system. It can support thyroid function. There's a lot of benefits to having some carbohydrates in the diet. And if you're in a caloric deficit, this sort of issue with insulin storing stuff places isn't really that much of a problem at all if you've got control of your blood sugar levels, which, if you're healthy, you should do. Like protein, this is also 4 calories per gram. And after protein and fat is set, you're probably looking at the remainder of your calories coming from carbohydrates. Part of this is going to be vegetables. So I would recommend at least 150 to 200 grams of veg per meal. This will increase your fiber intake, which will also keep you full. It will also improve your digestion and keep you regular. But I would look at, when you're looking at carbohydrates, have this around your training window or your last meal of the day. Often we go for these big high carb breakfasts and it leaves a lot of people feeling sluggish around lunchtime, early afternoon. Now, I remember for a number of years ago, when I followed a brilliant strength coach called Charles Pollock, who may rest in peace, he advocated a steak and nuts breakfast. And while I don't do that now, it's such a hard sell for clients, a bit too much. The clients that did trust me enough to do it rarely regretted it. And their energy was massively improved by going a lower carb, higher fat breakfast. And having carbs around training will help fuel your training, recover from training, and before bed will help calm you down for a restful night's sleep. But preference and consistency are going to be the things that are important here. The last macronutrient is going to be alcohol. This is 7 calories per gram, but that isn't really the whole story. Alcohol, not ideal really on any diet. It's toxic to the body, it can store fat loss, it will be something that the body will try and burn off before then tapping into fat stores, but it's not really about that. It's about that 7 calories per gram, plus the carbohydrates and sugar that's in the drinks, plus the fact that when you get drunk, you want a 4 a.m. kebab, and then you want the hangover breakfast, and these things can spiral. So while it's not a really important and certainly not essential macronutrient, it's really important to be aware of the impact it can have and just be mindful of it, budget it in, and just understand the effect that it potentially can have. So now we've set our calories, we've set our proteins, carbs, and fats. The next thing we want to look at is our activity. A higher activity level, certainly at lower intensities, will always be beneficial to people. Improved aerobic health can do a number of benefits, including improved stress management, improved heart health, improved aerobic capacity, which can improve our training, improve nutrient absorption, improve digestion. There's a lot of benefits to have a better aerobic health, lower blood pressure, lots of benefits. So it's very, very rare that I see a client get insanely lean on less than 8,000 steps a day. And I've had clients go anywhere between 8 and 17 to 20,000 steps. Obviously, very few people have to go to the extreme ends of that, but most people sit anywhere between the 10 to 15,000 steps mark per day is a good place to kind of keep yourself. But when you start going well below the 8,000 steps mark, you are making this a more difficult process for yourself. So when you're looking at steps, find ways to build steps into your day. Can you take 10 minutes away from your computer every hour to answer emails on your phone and walk around the office? Can you build a morning walk or evening walk into your routine? Can you get off a subway station earlier and walk an extra bit of distance? Can you park a little bit further away? Can you walk around your flat a little bit? Look at the ways of building it into your day before we start adding on endless cardio to try and hit it, or saying, I need to do a 5-hour walk at the end of the day. Most people, if they're mindful and resourceful, can get to 8,000 with minimal effort. If you're well under this and thinking, wow, that seems like a lot of steps, really be honest with yourself and look at your day. I guarantee you there are areas of your time in your day where you can move more than you're actually doing. So we mentioned improved aerobic health. One thing I would mention though is a lot of people go on these low carb diets and will start to go into high intensity interval training from the off. Now, whilst this isn't a bad modality, understand this is a big stress on the body, especially if this is a high impact thing like running on the streets or pounding a treadmill or burpees or mountain climbers. So this could be an issue with someone's joints. This could be an issue if you're already in a stressed job, we have poor digestion, we have other stress in our life, we have poor sleep. We're just adding stress into this cup. Also understand that the fuel needed to run a high intensity training is glucose. So you don't really want to pair high intensity cardio with a lower carbohydrate diet. I generally get most people doing lower intensity cardio, bring that like stress response down, get them into a good place with a diet. And if I want to build up food down the line, or if I want to throw in some HIIT down the line, we're in a better place to handle it. So now we've set activity, so we have the bare bones of our training. We're now going to look at deciding the approach. And there's many different approaches to having a diet. And I just want to offer a few here and find the one you think works well for you. So option 1 is a semi-rigid meal plan. People hate on meal plans, but I think they're phenomenal because they allow you to have structure, they allow you to see how a day's worth of eating can look, they allow you to have a bit of control about, okay, I'm hungry in the afternoon, what's in the meal before? Or I'm really losing energy, what's in the meal before that? Look, we can really control each variable in a meal plan, and it takes the guesswork and the decision fatigue out of what you need to eat per day. So it creates structure, it creates non-negotiables, it reduces decision fatigue, and it has a low margin for error. It's very difficult to mess up an exact meal plan when you eat exactly what it said on paper. But you're going to realize that this is potentially a rigid approach. It might not be a long-term approach because there isn't much flexibility in what we choose to eat. It's easy, but it doesn't allow the flexibility. The next step is maybe looking at a flexible meal plan. So maybe have something where you've got a meal plan where you have 2 or 3 different options. This adds a little bit more flexibility, but allows it within limits. You're not like opening up My Fitness Pal and have a million foods to choose from and don't know where to start. It just streamlines the process for you. And it allows you to work with, whether it's an accountability buddy or a trainer, to work together to contribute to this meal plan and build something that really does fit you, your goals, and your lifestyle. But there is a little bit more of a margin for error. But both of these are good for relatively simple approaches to getting started in your meal plan. The next approach is the popular one, tracking macros. Every coach in the world will say tracking macros is the best approach. And while I do think it's the approach we want to get a lot of people to long term, because it allows total flexibility, it allows you to choose any food you like and try and fit it in. It allows you to be able to weigh up pros and cons of certain food and take away that guilt of this food is bad, this food is good. If you can track it and go, this is X amount of calories, but it's a small portion size. So if I had that, I need to take that away from somewhere else and I'll be a bit hungrier. And you go, do you know what? It's not worth having the Snickers bar because I don't want to be that hungry. It's now not, oh, Snickers bar's bad, I can't have it. It's like you've weighed up the pros and cons and you decided whether it's worth the investment of your calorie budget to have that Snickers bar. But the problem with this, it requires a lot of education and there is a large margin for error. Understanding you're picking up MyFitnessPal for the first time, you may think you're tracking everything to the letter, but if we're guesstimating portion sizes, if we're forgetting things, if we're doing it after the fact and we're missing things, if we're not thinking about the milks in our teas, the oils in a coffee, the things we have in the partner's plate, if we're not taking those things into account, then there's a huge margin of error here that could leave you frustrated thinking you're only on 12, 13, 1400 calories and not losing weight, when in reality, you're on a lot more than that. But if it helps, you can start with just tracking calories and protein. That is a really easy way to start, and then carbs and fats can be a little bit more flexible. The last thing we look at here is our portion control guide. This is the Precision Nutrition from John Barari. He talks about having 1 pound of protein for girls, 2 pounds of protein for guys, 1 thumb-sized portion of fat for girls, 2 thumbs for guys, cupped hand of carbs for girls, 2 cupped hands of carbs for guys, and then fill the rest of your plate with vegetables. Now, this is a simple approach. It makes dieting very, very easy, and it's a good beginner's way to understand what a rough portion size should look like. But there's a large margin for error here because you're not thinking about things like sauces and oils and all those little hidden things that add up to big things. It's also difficult to work with a meal out, whereas with MyFitnessPal, you can sort of guesstimate and track that meal out and know roughly how many calories that's going to be. But you want to, it's good for a complete beginner, but you want to progress onto something more accurate over time. But also this is a good option post-diet. If you're someone that doesn't want to track forever, this is a good thing to move into to keep a level of accountability with your diet without having to track every single little thing on your approach. So lastly, I'm just going to go for a couple of top tips of what I think works well for most people when building their meal plans. I think most people work well with 3 to 4 meals per day. 2 of those meals could be a shake if you're mega busy. I quite like the 2 meals, 2 shakes per day. It makes food prep a lot easier. And I'd probably add something to bulk out those shakes, like a fiber supplement, to keep you relatively full throughout this process. But then if you start getting hungrier, you can switch up one of those shakes and replace it with another meal. I would spread meals relatively evenly throughout the day. Intermittent fasting works for some, but for most people, you tend to find them getting really hungry and opening the kitchen cupboards or having digestive issues because they're overstuffing themselves within a short space of time. So spread meals relatively evenly around your schedule. I would include some form of protein at each meal at anywhere between 20 to 40 grams. And I would make sure there's 150 to 200 grams of veggies in each meal. If you get those 2 things in place, it's really hard to go wrong. As we mentioned earlier, carbs around the workouts or our last meal of the day, and higher fats in the morning work well for the majority of people. One thing I found works really well is on training days, you've got to think about that you're going to commute to the gym, you're going to train, you're going to come away from the gym. That's 3 hours, where you're not really thinking about food. So with that in mind, maybe that's where you go for fattier cuts of meat and fish, oily fish, red meats, things that are more nutrient dense, but less added fat. So less avocados, oils, nuts. And this is often the tastier meat, so it allows you to keep those things in the diet and work it into your calories. On rest days, where you have more time to think about food and you're going to get a little bit hungrier, I quite like then bulking out your portion sizes. So maybe going for your turkey, your white fish, the things that are leaner, and then adding extra food sources on top to bulk out the fats, so added avocado, things like this, so we can fill our plates up a little bit more and keep ourselves more full. The last meal of the day, I often make the biggest meal of the day. This is to work around social meals, so you don't have to create quite as much of a buffer, but also this is the time when most people get cravings. So maybe leaving some calories for the end of the day just allows you to work those things naturally into the diet so you don't feel you're being deprived, or you're not having to use this amount of willpower at the end of the day where it's already been lowered like a battery draining down by the end of the day, and it's more likely you'll crack. If you're full at that time, you're less likely to. So there are my top tips to how to work around your meal plan, how to build it into your life. If you have any questions, follow me on @KingsleyDutton, drop me a message, I'll happily talk about nutrition. And if you want to jump on a strategy call, we're happy to help, and we can work on creating a meal plan for you that's truly personal. Hope you've enjoyed this bonus show, and if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform that you prefer. And if you want to support the show to allow me to do more of these Solo Solutions episodes, go to our Buy Me a Coffee link in the show description and donate whatever you can, and we'll give you more free content. But thanks for listening, guys, and I'll speak to you very, very soon.